What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel, where in today's video we are going to be talking about chapter 19 of The Mandalorian. This was a longer episode than we're generally accustomed to for this series. It had a lot of world building and a lot of setting up for the future. A lot of the episode is actually not focused on Din Djarin or the Mandalorians at all. It spends a lot of time on Coruscant with Dr. Pershing, and while I do kind of see how that could be potentially boring for some viewers, I do think that it's going to serve a very important purpose going forward, and I do think we got some hints and somewhat of a direction about where we could be going from here in this episode. So chapter 19 opens right where chapter 18 left off. We're still in the cave on Mandalore next to the living waters. Din Djarin's still knocked out, and Bo-Katan is just staring at the waters trying to process what she saw while she was saving Din Djarin. Last week, obviously, Bo-Katan saw the mythosaur under the water when she dove in to save Din, so now she's just still processing that moment while Din recovers. Grogu is very concerned about Din, but then he wakes up and Bo-Katan asks him, did you see anything alive under the water? And Din responds and says he didn't see anything, and then he's like, what do you mean? And Bo-Katan does not tell him about the mythosaur. I don't know why she's keeping it a secret. Maybe because she thinks that it actually does suggest that some of the superstitions that the children of the Watch hold could potentially be true, and she's afraid of that, and she doesn't want that to be the case. Or maybe, even more likely actually in my opinion, she knows that the existence of the mythosaur will reinforce their beliefs and cause them to go further down this rabbit hole that she does not support or believe in, particularly when it comes to Din Djarin, who I think she definitely has somewhat of a soft spot for, but she also might have some hope that he's going to come around and sort of align more with her side, and she knows that the existence of the mythosaur would lessen the chances of that happening. But then they leave Mandalore, they head back to Kalevala, and they are attacked by a squad of TIE interceptors. They manage to survive long enough in Bo-Katan's ship to, not be killed, and then Bo drops Din Djarin off, and then Din quickly gets in his ship, narrowly gets away, and then he and Bo take out this group of interceptors. But then they return to the castle, and as they're on approach, Bo sees it's on fire and it's being bombed by a group of TIE bombers. And so she sees her castle destroyed and she goes after them. But then what was a group of 3 interceptors turns into 50, and they're completely outnumbered. So Din Djarin sends some coordinates to Bo-Katan, and they both enter hyperspace and they get away from these Imperial ships. Din Djarin and Bo-Katan both exhibit some really impressive skills with their flying in order to take out the initial TIE interceptors and then to escape the rest of this fleet. And then they're on their way, and this is where the episode changes course completely. We go to Coruscant and we find Dr. Pershing, who at this time is giving a speech, and he's apologizing for the things that he did for the Empire, and he's talking about cloning and the reasons he initially became a scientist, and he talks about his mother and the fact that she died from heart failure, and had they had that technology that he played a hand in creating at the time of her death, he would have been able to save her, and that's sort of been the fuel to his fire for most of his life. And in the case of the Doctor specifically, it actually seems like he has had a change of heart, and he does want to do right by the New Republic. He wants to do the right thing and be a good person, but he also does think that the cloning technology that he was studying and creating with the Empire has some real value, and he wants to pursue that. So he's sort of easily coerced by the comms officer from season 2 of The Mandalorian who worked on Moff Gideon's ship, and she sort of persuades him to go after this thing if it means something to him, to pursue his studies in clonings and follow his passions. And she befriends him before this and really sort of gets on his good side, and then eventually Dr. Pershing, as he sees that the New Republic really has no value for his cloning, they don't see the value in it, that is, and they're just kind of destroying everything that the Empire ever created or touched in any way, basically. He's sort of frustrated by that, so it makes it easy for the comms officer to persuade him to go after this thing. And so she helps him to get onto an Imperial ship that is in a junkyard. It's set to be decommissioned and completely discarded. And so they get in there, Dr. Pershing gets what he needs, and then he quickly finds that he has been framed by this comms officer who, by the way, I assume you guys have watched the episode. She is working for the New Republic, along with Dr. Pershing and a group of a few other men who used to work for the Empire but are trying to do the right thing and make up for their transgressions in the past, and they've basically been rehabilitated and they're working for the New Republic now. But as I said, she frames him and he's arrested. He wakes up in this medical room and he turns and he sees the comms officer through the window and he's like, "You set me up," because she did. And the doctor in the room is preparing him for some more biological type therapy, where he's hooked up to a headset that was actually used by the Empire for a more intense procedure, and they're basically trying to sort of like alter his brain chemistry a little bit so that he doesn't feel the urge to continue to follow out his Imperial orders, which it doesn't seem like that's what he was trying to do anyways at this point. Like I said, it seems like he was actually trying to get on a straight and narrow and do the right thing, but again, he was framed by this comms officer who, at this point, the indication does very clearly seem to be that she is actually bad. So when she's left in the room all alone, she turns the notch that's connected to Dr. Pershing's headset all the way up. He begins to experience a lot of pain, and this is potentially going to like wipe his mind completely, or maybe even kill him. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think he will survive, but she basically turns it up to use it for the purpose that the Empire used to use it for on people. So he's going to come out of this thing in what I would assume is going to be sort of a deranged and very uncomfortable state, sort of like Bix in Andor when she gets interrogated by the Imperial officers. I assume it's going to be similar to something like that. He's probably really going to be out of it. But the question is, why did the comms officer do this? And again, the answer, I think, is she's actually bad. And I think she's probably taking orders either from Moff Gideon or from somebody even higher up. Maybe Snoke is already around at this time. Maybe it's somebody on Exegol. But if she is indeed bad, she's obviously taking orders from somebody. And I mean, I think those are the most likely candidates. It could also be like maybe Grand Admiral Thrawn, but I would probably say Moff Gideon is the most likely because she has worked for him before, and I think this could just be Moff Gideon trying to cover his tracks at this point, because Dr. Pershing obviously knows a lot about what Moff Gideon was trying to do, and perhaps Moff Gideon or whoever is giving these orders already has the information they needed, which that might increase the likelihood that Dr. Pershing will be killed at some point if he doesn't die in this episode. Again, I think he'll probably still be alive at that point, but I would say if he is alive, if he does continue to remember anything after that, he's probably on a very short leash and needs to be very careful who he interacts with and what he says and does going forward. But we'll see what happens with all of that. I was surprised that we went in this direction with this episode. Obviously, we've never really strayed away from Din Djarin for too long in any episodes of The Mandalorian, but I did think it was interesting to get a look at the New Republic and see how they're handling old Imperial officers and staff members and how they're trying to get rid of the Empire's stamp on the galaxy in any and every way possible, and trying to move the galaxy forward in a more positive direction. And then on that same token, it's also interesting to see how the Empire, or the remnants of the Empire, are continuing to set themselves up for the future and continue forward with Palpatine's contingency. If that is the connection that we're trying to make. We could be making some separate connection maybe to Grand Admiral Thrawn or something like that, and this doesn't really have that much to do with Palpatine, but I do think that based on what we've seen in the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian and in this season so far, it does seem like we are connecting slowly, a little bit more and more over time, to the sequel trilogy, to Palpatine's backup plan, and how cloning is going to tie into all of that. I also liked the mention of the Kaminoan technology that they referenced in this episode, and how all of the cloning research and everything that's taken place since Kamino was destroyed stems from the Kaminoans, and that's sort of like a connection to the Bad Batch that we've been seeing recently. Even though these 2 shows take place very far apart from one another, I feel like we're getting somewhat of a connection between these 2 shows, which is definitely cool because they're releasing on the same day as one another. I haven't seen this week's episode of The Bad Batch at the time of recording this video. I will be watching that sometime in the next day or 2 as well, but I do like both of these shows focus on cloning technology and the way that they're sort of using these tie-in shows to push us forward to the sequel trilogy a little bit. Not that we're ever going to have a direct tie-in where like all of these shows converge in a climactic event that's geared toward the sequel trilogy, although we could have that in some capacity, but it's more so just the fact that we're continuing to talk about Palpatine's focus on cloning and how that's eventually going to tie into his grand scheme where he creates Supreme Leader Snoke, where he creates Dathan, Rey's father for those who don't know, and then he's ultimately able to keep himself alive on Exegol for all that time. But all of that wraps up again again, we'll see where that storyline goes from here and how it connects with the Mandalorian story. Obviously, that's probably going to have some sort of connection with Grogu and why the Empire wanted him, and so I would expect those two stories to converge in the next episode or two, and we'll get some more insight on that. But now we go back to Din Djarin and Bo-Katan and Grogu. They arrive on the same planet that we saw the Children of the Watch in at the beginning of the first episode, where their covert has been hiding out. And as they arrive, Din Djarin tells Bo-Katan it would be better if you kept your helmet on, and it's also important to note that after entering the living waters, Bo-Katan has not removed her helmet to this point. And so, as they approach the cave where all of the Mandalorians are, Paz Vizsla comes out and he's like, stop it right there. You're an apostate. Bo-Katan is also an apostate. You guys aren't welcome here. And Din Djarin's like, well, I've brought proof that I have bathed in the living waters, and so I am redeemed. And Paz Vizsla says, we'll see about that. So they go to the armorer. Din Djarin pulls out the sample of water that he collected from the cave, and he hands it to her. She analyzes it and she's like, yep, these are the living waters. Din Djarin has been redeemed. And Bo-Katan, you too have been redeemed, as you bathed in the living waters and you have not removed your helmet since. You are free to leave our covert at any time, but until you do, or until you remove your helmet, you are free to walk the way. You are one of us. And Bo-Katan doesn't remove her helmet. She does say, I don't walk the way, but she seems a little bit conflicted about what she should do next here. This place could offer her a place of belonging, a place that she can call home. She can interact with her people and sort of be one of them. I don't know how long that's going to last. That could very well be broken up in the very next episode. But again, Bo is a little bit conflicted here. She doesn't know how to handle everything she's just went through. She and Din Djarin obviously have somewhat of a budding relationship. It remains to be seen whether that will become a romantic one or whether they'll just be friends or acquaintances, or maybe they'll turn on each other at some point, who knows. But I do think that Bo appreciates Din Djarin's presence, and obviously she does care about what happens with the dark saber as well. So it could turn out to be more of like a selfish thing where Bo just wants to get the dark saber, or it could be more of a situation where Bo-Katan really wants a place to call home and she wants to help to unite her people again. So we'll see where Bo goes with that, but again, she has seen the mythosaur in the living waters beneath Mandalore. She hasn't told anybody about it yet. She knows what that animal symbolizes for these people. She is now considered one of them, at least by them, whether she accepts that role or not. And so we'll see what Bo-Katan does from here. I think it's really interesting. I'm really liking delving into the character of Bo-Katan and sort of starting to explore her motivations a little bit more, and also exploring the Mandalorian lore and seeing, again, like I think I said last week, how the past is going to drive the future of these people. One of the other things that I anticipate is going to be brought up at some point, maybe not in this season, but it could very well be in this season, and this isn't something that was really alluded to in this episode, but Grogu is clearly becoming a Mandalorian. Grogu has chosen to reunite with Din Djarin, and Din is teaching him the ways of the Mandalorians. And so, if the way that the Children of the Watch follow is going to continue, and they're going to stand by the rule that you must keep your helmet on at all times, is that ever going to become a topic of interest or a controversial issue between Din Djarin and the Armorer and the rest of the covert? At some point, are they going to be like, hey, this kid needs to wear a helmet too, or we need to get rid of him? Or are they just going to be like, hey, you know, he can do what he wants? I feel like that's going to be something that's at least mentioned at some point. But I also do think that, you know, that could be how we eventually move in this direction where the helmets become less of a thing, and Bo-Katan's new sort of alliance with these people could be one of the first steps in that direction, as I would doubt that she's going to just continue to leave her helmet on for, you know, the rest of her existence. And so that could be another potentially interesting sticking point between Din Djarin and the rest of his people, because although it does seem like Din Djarin is trying to make Grogu into a Mandalorian, he doesn't follow the Mandalorian rules really at all at this point. So again, we'll see what happens with that. But that is just about going to wrap things up for me. Again, this wasn't like the most eye-popping, super gripping episode we've had of The Mandalorian by any means, but it did do a lot of world building, and I do think that it's going to serve a very important role. I don't think this was like a filler episode by any means, and I don't really like to use that term at all because I think it gets overused way too much anyways, but I do think that this episode served an important important role, and we will come to see that in the coming episodes. But that will do it for me, so let me know what you guys thought about this week's episode in the comments section below. Let me know what you're expecting to see in the future. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like to support the channel. Have a great rest of your day. Subscribe to the channel if you are new, and I will catch you in the next video.